Adam, what's shaking, brother? It's been a little while, and when this whole thing started, I promised your dad I would give you some industry advice, and then I promptly lost the script and started giving you life advice because I'm not sure how to give industry advice. There's too many variables: who you work for, where you work, what you're doing, and what your aspirations are. And so somehow I thought I could give you life advice and increase the number of variables and somehow be better off. But in the interest of actually answering what your dad asked for, I'm going to give you a little bit of industry deep dive, or at least something I think is useful. I don't know that I can give you industry advice, although we can talk about where you think you want to go next time we're speaking to one another. But today I wanted to look at essentially a 50,000 foot level view of the business you and I share, especially given what you were doing last time we spoke. So hopefully this is helpful. And with that, let's start drawing on the iPad and see what becomes useful to you. And we can talk about it whenever you have the chance. All right. So in our business, you can fund things a couple of different ways. You could have R&D work that's coming in. So you have all this fun stuff that is, sometimes kept as intellectual property or secret squirrel, and you're funding it yourself. Or you can have work that is customer R&D, where they're funding you to do R&D work. Think DARPA projects and things like that. And then way over here is the normal business. We'll just call it defense acquisitions, right? And I'm not sure any of this is necessary to draw out, but I hope it helps. In that major capability acquisition, the things that the customer has put you on contract for, the far right-hand side of that previous equation, the non-R&D work, if you will, is what I term as engineering to order. And what do I mean by that? I mean, in traditional defense acquisitions of big things like submarines and satellites and missiles and planes and all those things, the customer is giving you requirements to engineer to. You're creating the engineering to order. The opposite of that, or the counterpoint to that, or companion to that, is manufacturing to order. Think pickup trucks. Think the way it appears Anduril is approaching the industry of their products, where you manufacture something on your own. You design and manufacture something on your own using your own money, and then try and sell it. You become a defense services industry, not a defense contractor at that point. It's, again, broad brushstrokes, but you get the point. There are two main different ways to do this work. Neither one of them is right. It just happens to be focused on whatever your business model is. So let's talk about defense acquisitions for a little bit. The standard model, the engineering to order that I was talking about. So you'll get this contract. It'll come in. You're going to love my handwriting. You'll get used to it by the end of this. May not be able to read it, but you'll get used to it. You get a contract, and the contract has all this stuff in it that you're going to build. And then from there, the contractor breaks it down into functional requirements. That is, what is this thing going to do? And then you and the customer review it and decide, yep, the company understands what we're supposed to do well enough. And then from there, the contractor will break it down further and allocate each of the pieces out to a team to go design or purchase a solution. That's all the requirement side. From there, and I promise this gets to what you're doing today, you go from allocation to design work. And the design work ends with a blueprint or a structure of what you're going to build, what you're going to assemble, what you're going to integrate, whatever. In engineering terms, we call this an EBOM, engineering bill of material, right? You've likely worked with this quite a bit. This is the blueprint of the thing you're going to deliver, or at least the design thereof. And then you step into the world of manufacturing, because it turns out to manufacture something, you have to put it in a different order than what the engineer or the design engineer thinks the order should be. It's not that they compete or one's right or one's wrong. It's different purposes. So think the design engineer may have built a box that goes into some location, and then you put a panel over it and you assemble it with fasteners. Engineering doesn't care what order you do those things in from the EBOM standpoint. It's just a parts list at that point. But you know who cares a lot? Manufacturing. It turns out it's very important to put the box in first before you put the panel down. And so manufacturing interprets this EBOM. Here, I'll back that up a little bit so we don't have the noise. Engineering, on the manufacturing side, then creates an MBOM. Again, this is broad strokes. Just take it for what it is. This is the manufacturing view of the world. How you plan to assemble something, and usually this is where you get your demand signal. This is where you buy stuff. You've decided you're going to build it, so you're building a plan to build it, and you're gathering the parts that you need to do so. From there, to actually manufacture it, you need detailed instructions. And so you have work orders or shop orders or whatever your company happens to call it. I'll call it work orders for this point. Think of these as instructions for take that box, put it in this spot, attach it with 4 fasteners, put the panel on top, apply anti-corrosive, and then test in 24 hours. When you're done, scan in the serial number, record it, and call it complete. That's the detailed level work instructions. Once you've marked those things as complete, you've created as-built data, right? So this is what you actually assembled on the floor. It can be different. Fun fact here, if you compare the EBOM and the as-built, they can be different sometimes. Now, why is that? Well, because when you're manufacturing things that are complex, maybe this doesn't happen if you're manufacturing toasters, but it does when you're manufacturing cars or airplanes or submarines that are large and complex. It's very much I'll say bespoke process. You have to have these pressure relief valves in your processes to allow for deviation. Oops, I dropped a part, but I can work it back to blueprint by using, a couple of files and some paint. It's, oh crap, I needed to use a substitute because we ran into the main part. Things along those lines. The production line deviations, if you will. Those will cause your EBOM and your as-built to be different. So there's a giggle check that needs to occur, not just between all of these bills of materials, but at the end, making sure your product, the as-built, meets your EBOM. All right, cool story, John. From here, you are creating a couple other things. So you could have suppliers that impact this EBOM, so you may have to consume their information. You could have those same suppliers giving you as-built information. And then, one would hope, you're creating an as-delivered. This is the configuration that you're actually giving to the customer. And then they will continue to work on that product. And that's your as-maintained configuration, or as-tested, just depends. But an as-tested is an as-maintained. It's just on a test article. All right. So from there, you can sustain the product after delivery in different ways. Sometimes you build the product, you ship it out the door, and it is 100% on the customer to maintain an understanding and control over that product. And other times you have a contract to ensure the customer doesn't deviate from their configuration. At the very least, you could have, with complex things, a retrofit necessary. Likely many retrofits that are necessary over the life of that product. And so that can be handled in a couple ways. One of the ways, if the product is, let's say, standardized, like let's say you build missiles. Well, there's that one class of missile that's shipped out, sits in a silo, and hangs out for X number of years. If you need to rework that or retrofit it somehow, some companies will update the MBOM here, create new work orders to execute that retrofit, which updates a new as-built, right? It becomes a different as-built and therefore a different as-delivered, and that updates the as-maintained configuration. They may skip steps in there, but ultimately it's an update to the plan on how you're going to build it, and then the instructions for executing that, yielding an as maintained that's updated. The handoff there changes when the customer doesn't allow you or give you leverage to make the retrofits yourself. Sometimes, in some products, think battleships or something like that, you ship it out. The customer is turning wrenches on that battleship. They're the ones responsible for retrofitting it even when it needs it, whether that means they're hiring a contractor or not. And so you don't have this manufacturing view that you have in the missile example. What you have is something called a SUBOM or an SBOM. That is a structure of what that product functionally does. Yes, there's a physical SUBOM, just in case some random defense industry person is watching this. But this is broad strokes. Give it a break. We're not looking PhD level. So think of this SUBOM as a list of, here's my electrical parts, here's my harness parts, here's my widget A, widget B, whatever, and where they can belong. So you can put them in different locations. If you care about that stuff, there's a GIA 0007 standard that dictates how this and many other things occur. The point here is where that structure of what you're actually going to turn wrenches on the field meets the as-built data, that's where you get this as delivered. In parallel, the system that owns this as maintained, so it takes care of the transactions of what you put on the product and take off, removals and installs, all that good stuff. That is informed by another data feed that's like a parts catalog. It tells you what parts can be where, on which product, and it tells you all the alternates and substitutes and things like that that you're allowed to use, and it has to keep track of what retrofits have been accomplished. All right. That is the grand scheme of how data actually flows at like the 50,000 foot level. Why do I say all this? Well, since I can't give industry advice, I can at least give you some tools that you can use to understand the work you're in and where you might want to go. And you can argue a little more competently now when you're in a position. You can see yourself in scope. I think the last time we spoke, you said you were talking about or influencing the incorporation of a new shop floor system. The likelihood is you're dealing with work orders as built and possibly even the planning associated to that work. But what you may not be seeing is the PLM tool that governs some of these other structures and communicates it downstream to you and to suppliers. So understand that exists and that it's, in context, an extremely important piece of your business. Know that if designing it is really hard, it gets harder as you go to the right. What do I mean by that? It gets more complex when you leave the design world and hop over to the planning world, because doing things repeatably is 10 to 100 times harder. I think that's the way Elon put it. And then sustaining things, which is outside of your control most of the time, is another order of magnitude jump of difficulty. So, thanks for putting up with my ugly handwriting. Hopefully you find some of this useful. Shoot me a note, shoot me questions with whether or not you found this useful, or if you have questions on some piece of it that I might have an answer to. I don't want to belabor the point too much further, but we'll be back to our regularly programmed life advice that is unsolicited in the next video. Love you, brother. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.